I always thought the worst kind of pain comes from betrayal, but I was wrong. Betrayal hurts, yes, but there's something far more disturbing than that, something that crawls under your skin and stays there long after the dust settles. It's when people smile to your face, call you family, act like they love your kids, sit at your table, eat your food, compliment your home, and then, behind closed doors, plot your destruction like you're some obstacle they have the right to remove. That's the kind of pain that stains you. It's slow, it's cold, it's calculated, and when you finally see the whole picture, you're left wondering how long they've been rehearsing your downfall, how long they've been gathering their little lies, practicing their shocked faces, preparing the moment they'd finally get to watch you break. And what makes it worse? They really thought they were going to win. They really believed they could tear apart what we built, walk into our life like they owned it, and put me and my kids out on the street like we were extras in their messed up fantasy. And the wildest part? They actually believed they were justified. It started slowly, quietly, like a cold draft coming through a cracked window. You notice it, but you don't panic. You just pull your sweater tighter and assume it's nothing. That's how the first few weeks felt. A weird message here, an odd phone call there, a sudden shift in the tone of his mother's voice, like she was forcing sweetness over something sour inside her. I always felt she didn't like me, but dislike is one thing. This was different. This was sharp. Calculated. Intentional. I didn't know yet that she had already partnered up with the one person who hated me more than she ever could, his ex-wife. And together those two bonded over their shared misery like they were long-lost twins finally united by a common enemy, me. The first real blow came on a Tuesday afternoon. Nothing special, nothing dramatic. I was making dinner, the kids were running around doing what kids do, and everything felt normal. My husband walked through the door looking tired in that way only work can make you tired. He kissed me, grabbed some water, and for a few minutes everything was peaceful, until his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, froze, blinked twice, then turned the screen away from the kids. My heart didn't drop because I thought he was guilty, it dropped because I saw the confusion, the disbelief, the "what the hell is this?" written across his face. And when he finally showed me the phone, my stomach twisted. It was a screenshot. A fake conversation. It showed a woman flirting with him, saying they'd been meeting up, saying she missed him. But the longer I stared at it, the more obvious it was that someone made it. The grammar was wrong. The tone was all off. The timestamps were mismatched. The contact photo was pixelated like it had been copied 3 times. Whoever made it didn't even know how he typed. They didn't know his habits. They didn't know his voice. But they thought I would. At first I almost laughed. I thought it was some scam. But he knew exactly what it was. "It's her," he said quietly. "It has to be." And he didn't mean the mystery woman. He meant his ex. His ex-wife, who still talked to his mother like they were best friends, who thought she had some kind of ownership over his life even though they'd been divorced for years. The same woman who used their past as a weapon every chance she got. The woman who made herself the victim even in situations where she was the one causing chaos. And suddenly, all those weird comments, all those little emotional nudges from his mother made sense. They were working together. Plotting. Planning. Testing the waters to see how far they could push. But the day I realized how far they were willing to go was the day they tried to use my own kids to scare me. His mother showed up unannounced, which she always did, but this time she walked around the house like she was evaluating it, assessing things, touching walls, asking questions. "So whose name is the house under?" she asked casually, like she was talking about the weather. I felt my jaw tighten, because why would that matter to her? Why would she care who the house belonged to unless she had an agenda? She smiled when I didn't answer. "You know," she whispered, "sometimes things change. Sometimes people don't stay together. You should always have a backup plan." I didn't know whether to laugh at the audacity or kick her out right there, but before I could react, she added, "Especially for the children. Stability is important." She left soon after, and at the time I didn't realize how calculated that subtle little jab was. Later, it hit me, she was planting seeds. Seeds meant to grow into panic, doubt, fear. They wanted me anxious. They wanted me insecure. They wanted him questioning whether keeping the house was worth all the trouble. The next phase of their plan was messier, bolder, and so much more unhinged. They started sending fake messages pretending to be me, but they sent them to him. They pretended I was talking to some guy. They pretended I was planning to leave. They faked conversations saying things like, he doesn't deserve half the house, or once I get the kids settled, I'm kicking him out. The thing is, they didn't know my writing style. They didn't know how I speak. They didn't know my slang, my tone, my structure. They couldn't imitate me even if they tried. But they weren't trying to convince him with quality. They were trying to break us with quantity. They were hoping the flood of fake drama would wear us down, make us irritated, make us tired enough to fight each other over nothing. But the exact opposite happened. Every message they sent became proof of how unhinged they were. Every lie they created became another reason for us to sit together and talk things through. Every attempt at sabotage became fuel for our unity. But the final blow, the moment I realized this wasn't petty jealousy but sheer cruelty, was the night my oldest child came up to me with tears in her eyes and asked if we were going to have to sleep in the car. I froze. My heart genuinely stopped for a second. Why would you think that, baby? And she whispered the words that made my blood turn cold. Grandma said Mommy and Daddy might lose the house, and that you might have to take us somewhere else. That was the moment something inside me hardened. I changed that night. Not in anger, anger came later, but in clarity. Everything snapped into sharp focus. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a personality clash. This wasn't miscommunication between generations. This was an attack. A planned, deliberate, malicious attack on our family, our home, our stability, and my children's sense of safety. And once someone targets your children, not indirectly, not accidentally, but intentionally, you stop playing nice. My husband confronted his mother the next day. I wasn't there, but I heard every word later. She didn't even deny it. She twisted everything, acted like she only wanted to help, like she was worried, like she didn't mean it that way. Classic manipulation. His ex-wife, however, went further. She tried to justify everything by saying she was protecting her rights. What rights? What claim did she think she had to our home? But she genuinely believed she should have a say in his new life. She genuinely believed I was some temporary obstacle in her way. She genuinely believed that if she pushed hard enough, lied enough, stirred up enough chaos, she could destroy what we had and rewrite the story in her favor. And then came the day they overplayed their hand. They tried to file a claim that the house should be transferred back to him for the sake of his previous family. As if I didn't exist. As if my kids didn't exist. As if our life wasn't real. As if I was some placeholder woman he happened to marry by mistake. They miscalculated badly. Not only did they lose that fight, but the truth spilled out, every lie, every fake message, every whisper campaign. They exposed themselves more thoroughly than anything we could have done to them. And that was the day we cut them off. All of them. No talking. No visits. No fake apologies. No pretending we're still family. The silence since then has been loud, but peaceful. For the first time in years, my home feels like mine. My kids no longer ask if we're going to lose the house. My husband sleeps at night without worrying what new chaos they'll unleash. And me? I finally got my power back. I finally stood up not just for myself, but for my children, my marriage, my peace, my home. They tried to break us. They failed. They tried to take everything. They walked away with nothing. And I walked away knowing one thing with absolute certainty: when someone tries to destroy your family, you don't crumble, you rise. The strangest thing about finally seeing your enemies clearly is that it doesn't bring peace right away, it brings a storm. A big one. Because once you recognize someone's true intentions, once you see the ugliness behind their pretty smiles and polite greetings, you can't unsee it. It doesn't matter if they back off for a while, it doesn't matter if they act quiet or pretend they've changed, because your body remembers the danger. And that's exactly what the weeks after the first confrontation felt like my mind was calm, but my body was bracing for the next impact. I kept telling myself, maybe this is over. Maybe they're embarrassed. Maybe they'll leave us alone now. But deep down, in that little part of your spirit that never lies, I felt it, the peace wasn't real. It was the kind of silence predators use to watch you. My husband tried to stay optimistic. He wanted to believe his mother had finally crossed a line that even she couldn't justify. He wanted to believe the ex-wife had enough pride left to step back. But I knew better. People like them don't stop because they feel guilty. They stop only when they run out of ammunition, and neither of those women had run out. They were just rearranging their weapons. The first sign that something new was brewing came in the most subtle, almost laughably petty way. Suddenly his mother started sending him pictures of old family memories, photos of him with his ex-wife, pictures of them cooking, smiling, laughing. Every message included a small comment like, "Such happier times," or, "You were so much stronger back then." I laughed at first. It was pathetic. It was beyond obvious. But what bothered me wasn't the attempt to stir nostalgia, it was the frequency. Every day. Sometimes twice a day. It was intentional emotional pressure, disguised as harmless reminiscing. A slow drip meant to wear down the stone. And while she was working her emotional manipulation on him, the ex-wife was crafting a different narrative for the outside world. She started posting things online, cryptic quotes about losing a man to a snake, kids being brainwashed, homes stolen by new women. She never mentioned us by name, but she didn't need to. Their entire circle of mutual friends knew exactly who she meant. And of course, his mother interacted with every post. Liked them. Commented little supportive notes. They weren't hiding their alliance anymore, they were flaunting it. But the real storm started when we discovered they had gone behind our backs again and contacted several members of his extended family. Cousins, an aunt, even a distant uncle he barely spoke to. And their message was always the same: he's being manipulated. She's controlling him. The kids aren't safe. The house belongs to the family, not to her. They painted me like I was some kind of witch who cast a spell on him. Like our children weren't real. Like our home wasn't ours. The disrespect was unbelievable. And the worst part? Some people believed them. Not because the lies were good, they weren't, but because gossip travels faster than truth. And people love drama more than they love accuracy. Then came the financial attacks. At first, tiny little probes, questions about money, accusations whispered behind our backs, claims that I was draining him. They tried to paint me as a gold digger, even though I paid half the bills and sometimes more. Then they escalated. Fake debts they claimed he owed. Old documents they found suggesting he had some responsibility from the previous marriage. None of it was real. All of it was crafted to create financial stress. Because stress breaks relationships. That's what they were aiming for, exhaustion. But the day they attempted to weaponize child services was the day I almost lost my composure completely. Because now they weren't just playing with our marriage or our finances, they were trying to destroy my motherhood. They filed a concern anonymously, claiming our home environment was unstable. They said the children were fearful. They said I was emotionally volatile. Every word was a lie. Every detail invented. I was furious, but I forced myself to stay calm, because I knew these agencies deal with real situations and deserve real respect. I opened the door when they came. I answered every question. The kids were fine. The house was clean. There was food in the kitchen. We had nothing to hide. and the case was closed immediately. But the humiliation, the violation, the fact that they were willing to drag government agencies into our home just to hurt me, was a level of cruelty I hadn't imagined even from them. When I told my husband, he snapped in a way I had never seen before. That was the turning point for him. Up until then, some part of him still wanted to believe his mother wasn't dangerous, just misguided. But that moment shattered every illusion he had left. He realized that people who truly love you do not try to tear apart your children's lives. They do not try to get your spouse labeled unstable. They do not use institutions meant to protect kids as weapons of revenge. That was the moment he said, "They don't get back into our lives. Ever." And even though I felt relieved to hear it, I also felt something else, a deep, heavy sadness. Because cutting people off sounds simple, but emotionally it's messy. He was losing a mother. His kids were losing a grandmother. And even though that woman was toxic to her core, grief doesn't care about logic. But the ex-wife wasn't done. Not even close. The more he pulled away from his mother, the more desperate she became, and the more desperate she became, the more the ex-wife accelerated her attacks. It was like watching two people sink in quicksand and flail wildly, grabbing anything they could to drag someone else under with them. And their new strategy? Social sabotage. They started reaching out to people I knew, friends, coworkers, neighbors, and feeding them stories about me. They told people I was violent. They told people I screamed at the kids. They told people I controlled him, isolated him, manipulated him. They tried to turn my entire social circle against me. And for a moment, I'll admit it, it worked. Some people pulled away. Some people stopped inviting us places. Some people looked at me differently, like they were trying to figure out whether the rumors were true. And that was the hardest part. Not the lies themselves, but the fact that they landed on fertile soil in some people's minds. But instead of breaking me, it did something else. It made me shed every single person who wasn't really in my corner. And that turned out to be a blessing. Because when you're going through war, you need warriors beside you, not spectators. Meanwhile, at home, the tension became suffocating. Not between me and my husband, if anything, we were stronger than ever, but around us. Every time the phone rang unexpectedly, we froze. Every time someone knocked on the door, my heart jumped. Every message from an unknown number felt like another attack waiting to happen. I started sleeping with one foot mentally on the ground, ready for the next round. My husband started double-checking the locks at night. The kids became clingier, even though we tried to shield them from everything. Stress seeped into every corner of our daily life. Then came the breaking point, the moment their intentions became undeniable. The ex-wife filed a statement claiming that my husband promised her the house years ago. No documents. No evidence. Nothing but her own delusions. She claimed the house was rightfully hers because they were family first. She said I manipulated him into buying the home in my name. She said I was replacing her children with mine. That last part made my blood boil. Because my children never replaced anyone, they are simply loved. That's what enraged her the most, that our family existed without her approval. His mother backed the claim, of course. She provided her own statement, saying she witnessed conversations that never happened. Saying she had concerns about me. Saying she believed I was unstable and dangerous. She even said the kids seemed afraid of me, when in reality they ran to me every morning for hugs. Her lies were disgusting. And watching her use her age, her concerned parent image, her manipulation skills to present herself as credible, it made something inside me harden even more. But here's the thing about lies, the bigger they get, the easier they are to expose. We came in with actual documents. With timestamps. With witnesses. With evidence that contradicted every word they said. And watching their little story crumble in front of them was the first time I felt true satisfaction in this entire nightmare. They walked in expecting to win. They walked out furious, humiliated, and more determined to hate me than ever. And that's when I realized something important. I had spent so long being defensive, so long trying to protect my family from their attacks, that I never paused to acknowledge something powerful. I wasn't weak. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't fragile. I had been outsmarting, outmaneuvering, and outlasting two grown adults who had nothing better to do than obsess over my life. I had kept my kids safe. I had kept my marriage intact. I had kept myself sane despite their psychological warfare. And that realization became the shift I needed. I stopped reacting emotionally. I stopped giving them space in my mind. I started focusing on building my life instead of defending it. But of course, before the final part of this war came, they tried one last desperate act, something so bizarre, so outrageous, that even now I shake my head at the memory of it. They tried to stage a fake emergency, hoping to lure my husband away from home. They told him the ex-wife had a breakdown. That she was in danger. That she needed him. They wanted him to rush over, alone, without me, so they could twist the story and claim I didn't allow him to go. They wanted him seen at her place so they could start new rumors. But he didn't fall for it. He simply said, "Tell her to call an ambulance if she needs help," and hung up. And that was the moment they realized they'd lost their grip completely. That was the moment everything started collapsing for them. That was the moment the war turned in our favor. What nobody tells you is that when you cut toxic people out of your life, they don't disappear quietly. They cling. They claw. They scrape for control like your oxygen, and they're suffocating. And the harder you pull away, the more frantic they become. That's exactly what the next part of our story felt like watching two people spiral because the strings they used to pull were suddenly cut, and now they didn't know how to live without manipulating someone. They couldn't accept the truth, that their power was gone. That we weren't scared anymore. That their little empire of whispered lies had collapsed. And instead of walking away with whatever dignity they had left, they launched themselves into a full-blown meltdown that touched every corner of our life. At first, the meltdown wasn't visible, it was subtle, quiet, like a pressure in the air before a tornado. They stopped contacting us directly. No calls. No messages. No fake emergencies. Nothing. And for a moment I thought, maybe this is it. Maybe the storm is finally over. But then little hints started slipping through. Neighbors asking weird questions. A friend pulling me aside and saying, "Someone mentioned you were controlling." Someone else asking, "Are you and your husband okay?" I heard there was trouble. Trouble? From who? And in that moment I felt it again, their fingerprints. The ex-wife's obsession. The mother's bitterness. Their toxicity had just shifted to a different battlefield, the social one. They couldn't control us anymore, so they went after our reputation. They couldn't break our marriage, so they tried to break how people saw us. And the crazy part is, they were strategic. They didn't spread ridiculous drama. No, they started with believable lies. Small ones. Subtle ones. Lies that were just close enough to the truth to get people whispering. They said my husband changed since being with me. They said I isolated him. They said I drove a wedge between him and his family. They said I refused to let the grandmother see the kids, even though she had been the one to abuse her access. They painted me as controlling, cold, manipulative, emotionally unstable. And honestly, the ease with which some people swallowed those lies made me realize how fragile social relationships really are. How quickly people will believe something ugly if they hear it from enough mouths. Meanwhile, his ex-wife ramped things up on her end. She started showing up at places she knew we went to. The grocery store. The park. Even my kids' school. She pretended each encounter was a coincidence, but there are no coincidences when someone is obsessed. She stared. She whispered. She made sure other parents heard her loud little comments about broken families and women who steal husbands. She was building a narrative, sowing doubt like a seamstress working overtime, hoping something, anything, would tear the fabric of our life apart. But the worst part? She wasn't working alone. His mother, even though we had cut her off, found creative ways to attack from the shadows. She contacted his coworkers. She contacted old friends. She even reached out to my family, trying to warn them about me. She said I was dangerous. She said I had episodes. She said I screamed at the kids and my husband lived in fear. She used her age and her concerned mother tone to sell her lies. And some people believed her because older women are often assumed to be wise, gentle, truthful, when in reality she was one of the most manipulative people I'd ever met. But the real escalation came when they tried once again to weaponize the house. They'd lost the first battle, but they didn't stop. This time, they went for something bolder. They claimed the property was purchased using marital assets from my husband's previous marriage. The ex-wife argued that since they were together for many years, any money he ever earned still belonged partially to her. Never mind the facts. Never mind the dates. Never mind the actual financial history. She simply believed that her existence entitled her to everything he had ever touched. She submitted papers, fake records, fabricated statements. She tried to claim that some money that was never hers to begin with had been used for the down payment of our home. And the craziest part? His mother backed her up again. She created a story about how she witnessed him using funds he never used, making transactions he never made. Their audacity was beyond comprehension. They wanted the home not because they needed it, not because they deserved it, but because taking it from us would feed their ego. Because watching us lose something we built would validate their bitterness. We fought it again. More paperwork. More evidence. More stress. More sleepless nights. I felt like my body was always tense, my jaw clenched, my chest tight. I kept imagining the worst-case scenario, us losing everything, my kids crying, me packing our lives into boxes while those two women celebrated. It haunted me. And even though deep down I knew the truth was on our side, the emotional weight was suffocating. One night, after putting the kids to bed, I broke down for the first time. Not angry tears. Not dramatic ones. Quiet tears. The kind that come when your soul is just tired. I was sitting on the kitchen floor, back against the cabinet, shaking from exhaustion. My husband found me and sat next to me without saying anything. He didn't tell me to be strong. He didn't say it'll be okay like people do when they don't know what else to say. He just held my hand. And in that silence, something shifted. I realized that as long as we stood together, they couldn't take what mattered most. They could take property. They could damage reputations. They could create chaos. But they couldn't break the love that we kept choosing every single day. But of course, the ex-wife and his mother didn't stop. The moment the legal attempt failed again, they switched tactics. They tried to turn my husband against me emotionally, one more time, but harder. His mother sent letters this time. Long ones. Handwritten. Dramatic. She wrote about how she missed the old him. How he had changed since being with me. How she was worried for the kids. She told him forgiveness was still possible if he walked away now. She literally begged him to leave our family. And when he ignored her letters, she escalated into guilt. How could you abandon your mother? How could you choose her over family? One day you will regret turning your back on your blood. Each letter was filled with manipulation, gaslighting, emotional blackmail. The ex-wife, on the other hand, chose a different angle. She tried to flirt with him. She sent pictures. She sent old photos of them together. She sent nostalgic messages about the good times. She even pretended to need emotional support, writing things like, "You're the only one who ever really knew me." It was pathetic. Transparent. Desperate. But she didn't stop. She tried again and again, hoping one day he'd slip, respond emotionally, or even just show up at her door out of frustration. But he didn't. Every message she sent, he showed me. Every attempt she made became another reason for us to stay united. And that unity is what finally drove them insane. Because manipulative people don't know what to do with a couple that refuses to crumble. They don't know how to fight people who choose honesty over chaos. They couldn't handle the fact that every attack they launched only made us talk more, trust more, love more. They wanted cracks, but they created strength. They wanted distance, but they created closeness. They wanted chaos, but they built the foundation of our peace. So they went after the last thing they could reach, the kids. Not directly. Not violently. No, they were smarter than that. They used little digs. Small comments. Innocent-sounding questions. They told the kids things like, "Mommy doesn't let us see you because she's jealous." Or, "Daddy used to be happier before." Or, "We're still your real family." The emotional manipulation was subtle, but effective. For weeks the kids kept asking questions that stabbed me in the heart. "Why doesn't Grandma like you? Why does she say you're mean? Why does she say Daddy used to be better before?" I kept my answers calm, gentle, age-appropriate. But inside I was boiling. They were poisoning my babies. They were turning their personal vendetta into psychological warfare against innocent children. That was the moment when I lost the last bit of sympathy I had left for those women. I no longer saw them as misguided. Or jealous. Or bitter. I saw them clearly as dangerous. Emotionally dangerous. Spiritually dangerous. Toxic in a way that spreads like mold if you let it. And I knew then that cutting them off wasn't just a boundary, it was protection. But before we could fully shut the door, they tried one last desperate tactic: division. They wanted to force my husband to choose. They wanted him to pick family or wife, as if the two categories were mutually exclusive. As if I wasn't also his family. As if the children we were raising together didn't count. His mother called him and said, "If you stay with her, you're no son of mine." The ex-wife messaged him and wrote, "I forgive you if you come back." They both cornered him emotionally, pushing him into a choice that wasn't even real. They wanted to break him from the inside out, because destroying me wasn't enough, they wanted him too. But instead of breaking, he finally stood up in a way I had been waiting for. He told them the truth they had been avoiding, that we were his family now. That the past was gone. That their manipulation was over. That he wouldn't entertain their lies, their guilt, their emotional blackmail. He said, "I'm choosing my wife. I'm choosing my kids. I'm choosing my peace." And that, more than anything, is what pushed them into their final collapse. Because manipulators don't know what to do with people they can't control. The thing about reaching a breaking point is that people imagine it as some dramatic explosion, some loud moment where you scream or slam a door or throw something across the room, but that's not how it happens in real life. In real life, the breaking point comes quietly. It's not fire, it's exhaustion. It's not the storm, it's the moment right after, when you're standing in the wreckage and realizing no one is coming to help you clean it up. And that's exactly where I found myself after everything they'd put us through. Not angry. Not hysterical. Just done. Emotionally, spiritually, mentally done. And strangely, that was the moment I felt my strength return, because when you stop seeking fairness from unfair people, they lose the last bit of power they had over you. But of course, before the peace came, there was one more battle. And it was the ugliest one yet. If part 2 was their meltdown, and part 3 was their desperation, then part 4 was their final, vicious attempt to crush us completely. It was like watching two people lose their grip on reality, clinging to their bitterness like it was the only thing keeping them alive. They acted not out of logic anymore, but out of pure obsession. And obsessed people are dangerous, not because they're strong, but because they have nothing left to lose. After my husband told them he chose us, me, our kids, our home, they didn't retreat. They escalated. The ex-wife's posts became more aggressive, more targeted, almost deranged. She stopped being subtle and started openly implying I was abusive. She wrote things like, "Women like her ruin families, some people will do anything for a house, children shouldn't be forced to live with unsafe people." She didn't say my name, but everybody knew. And the worst part? Some people agreed with her, not because they believed her lies, but because they enjoyed the drama. They shared her posts, commented supportive little lines, stirred up sympathy she didn't deserve. His mother, meanwhile, turned into something I'd never seen before. She became obsessed with painting herself as the victim. She cried to anyone who would listen. She told people her son abandoned her. She said I brainwashed him. She said she was cut off from her grandchildren because of me, even though she had been the one to manipulate, poison, undermine, and traumatize them. She even claimed she feared for her life because of us, yes, genuinely claimed she was unsafe, like we were some kind of violent criminals instead of two exhausted parents trying to protect our family. And then came the day everything reached its twisted peak. The ex-wife and his mother teamed up publicly. They posted matching updates online, both claiming to be survivors of a toxic situation. They implied they had been abused by us emotionally. They said they were standing together as women against manipulation. They made themselves martyrs in a story where they were the villains. And the comments, they were flooded with pity. People sent them prayers, encouragement, validation. Complete strangers were treating them like heroes. And watching that unfold was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. It felt like being trapped in a movie where the villain wins the public and the hero becomes invisible. But even that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what they tried next, something so cruel and so calculated that even now, my stomach tightens remembering it. They tried to turn my husband against our oldest child. Not directly, not by saying something obvious, but emotionally, subtly, in a way only master manipulators know how to do. They reached out to our daughter behind our backs. They told her things like, "Your daddy misses the real family, he shouldn't have to choose, your mommy changed him, your daddy cries at night because of her." None of it was true. Not a word of it. But children don't know how to filter manipulation. They don't know how to separate lies from concern. They absorb everything. And one evening, our daughter came to my husband and asked, "Do you see RYB don't get to rewrite our life? You don't get to claim our home. You don't get to weaponize our kids. You don't get to dictate the happiness of a man who doesn't belong to you." Her face turned red, but she stayed silent. And I finished with the line that ended it all. "You didn't lose him to me. You lost him because you never valued him when you had him." She walked away trembling. And for the first time, I didn't feel afraid. I felt free. The strangest part of surviving emotional warfare is what happens after the weapons go quiet. People imagine peace as this soft, warm thing that comes after chaos, but it's not like that at all. Real peace doesn't arrive with calm, it arrives with emptiness. With silence that feels unfamiliar, almost suspicious. When you've been constantly attacked, constantly bracing for the next blow, constantly checking your phone or looking over your shoulder or wondering what fresh hell is coming next, that silence doesn't feel like freedom at first. It feels like the pause before another strike. And for a while, I couldn't relax. My mind kept replaying everything they'd done, everything they might still do. Even though we'd cut them off, even though the lies were exposed, even though people were starting to see the truth, I carried the trauma in my body like a shadow that followed me everywhere. I didn't notice it at first. It crept in slowly, the way stress always does, tight shoulders, headaches, a knot in my stomach that never fully went away. Then came the dreams. Dreams of losing the house. Dreams of my kids crying. Dreams of my husband being pulled away from me by invisible hands that looked suspiciously like theirs. I would wake up breathless, my heart pounding like I'd been running. And even though my husband held me and told me I was safe, my brain didn't believe him yet. Trauma doesn't leave just because the people who caused it are gone. It lingers, like smoke after a fire that destroyed everything but somehow refuses to clear. And the hardest part? I wasn't the only one affected. My kids, my sweet, innocent babies, had absorbed more than I realized. They didn't talk about it directly, but kids rarely do. Instead, it came out in little ways. My oldest started double-checking things, asking questions over and over. We're not moving, right? Grandma can't take us away, right? You and Daddy aren't fighting, right? That last question broke me the most, because she had seen too much, heard too much, absorbed too much from people who should have protected her, not poisoned her. My younger one became clingier. She didn't want to sleep alone. She cried when I left the room. At first I thought it was just a phase, but then she whispered one night, "I don't want Grandma to take me." I held her tight, swallowing my rage because I didn't want her to feel it. I wanted her to feel safe, not scared of the world. But inside, something burned quietly, a kind of protective fire I hadn't felt before, a fire that said, "No one will ever harm my children again." Meanwhile, my husband was dealing with his own internal war. Cutting off his mother wasn't easy for him, no matter how she treated him. He grew up believing she was the center of his world, the one person he owed unconditional loyalty to. And now he was seeing her clearly, without the fog of guilt or obligation. That clarity hurt him in ways I couldn't fix. I watched him sit in silence for long stretches, processing decades of manipulation he had never recognized before. He wasn't grieving the person she was, he was grieving the mother he wished she had been. And that grief was heavy. Some nights he couldn't sleep. Some nights he paced. Some nights he just held me and whispered, "I don't understand how she could do this to us." I didn't have an answer for him. Some people love the idea of family more than they love the actual people in it. Some people cling to control because it's the only thing they know. Some people confuse love with possession. His mother was all of those things, wrapped into one toxic package. She loved him, I think, but only in ways that benefited her. She loved him when he obeyed her. When he chose her. When he carried her emotional weight. But she didn't love him enough to let him grow, move on, or build his own life. And that realization shattered something inside him. But it also rebuilt something else, something stronger. Because once he finally saw her manipulation, he realized the freedom that comes from stepping away from someone who's been controlling your strings your whole life. But even though we were healing, even though we were growing stronger as a family, the ex-wife and his mother weren't done with their obsession. They weren't attacking us directly anymore, but obsession doesn't turn off like a switch. It lingers in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity. And soon enough, their presence crept back into our lives in small, subtle ways. It started with anonymous messages again. Nothing dramatic, just little whispers meant to unsettle us. "He'll regret choosing you. Your marriage won't last. The truth always comes out." Childish, pathetic, but annoying. Then came a new wave of fake accounts watching our social media. Not messaging, just watching. Lurking. Monitoring. The digital version of someone peeking through your window at night. I started blocking them, one by one, but they kept coming back with new ones. They weren't attacking, they were observing. Waiting. Planning. That's what scared me, not their words, but their silence. Silence from someone who hates you is more dangerous than noise. Because noise means they're acting. Silence means they're thinking. And then came the incident that shattered whatever fragile calm we had built. One afternoon, while picking up my youngest from school, I saw his ex-wife's car parked across the street. She wasn't doing anything. She wasn't talking to anyone. She wasn't causing a scene. She was just sitting there, watching. Our eyes met through her windshield. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She just stared, expressionless. Cold. Calculating. It felt like being studied by something predatory. And even though she didn't approach us, the message was loud and clear: I'm still here. I didn't tell my husband right away. I didn't want to stress him. But when it happened a second time, and then a third, I realized this wasn't coincidence. She was watching our schedule, tracking our movements, learning our routine. It wasn't physical intimidation, it was psychological. A reminder that she wasn't finished. That she still had an eye on us. I finally told him, and for the first time in weeks, I saw real fear on his face. Not fear of her hurting him, but fear of her hurting us, emotionally, legally, mentally, any way she could. And just as we were trying to figure out how to handle that, his mother found a new way to reinsert herself into the narrative. She reached out to his extended family again, telling them he was living a lie, that I was controlling every aspect of his life, that he was isolated, that he was not allowed to speak to her. She twisted everything into a story where I was the villain and she was the abandoned, heartbroken mother. She leaned into her role like she was auditioning for a movie. And of course, some people bought it. Not all, but enough to cause tension. Suddenly, people we once trusted became distant. Invitations stopped. Conversations turned awkward. Some relatives avoided us entirely. I could feel their judgment like heat on my skin. They looked at me as if I had stolen him from them instead of simply building a life with him. They saw me not as his wife but as the wedge between him and his mother. They didn't know the truth, or maybe they didn't want to know because the truth wasn't dramatic enough for them. People love a scandal. They love a villain. And I made an easy one because I wasn't telling my side. I was too tired to defend myself. Too tired to keep explaining. Too tired to fight a story they had crafted so carefully. But something shifted inside me around that time. Something fundamental. I realized that I was done living in reaction to them. Done explaining myself to people who didn't deserve explanations. Done worrying about opinions that weren't rooted in truth. Done letting toxic people shape my emotions. I realized that I wasn't the weak one in this story. They were. People who constantly scheme are never strong, they're scared. Scared of being irrelevant. Scared of losing control. Scared of facing who they actually are without someone else to blame. And once I understood that, the fear they used to instill in me died. But even though we were healing, even though we were growing stronger as a family, the ex-wife and his mother weren't done with their obsession. They weren't attacking us directly anymore, but obsession doesn't turn off like a switch. It lingers in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity. And soon enough, their presence crept back into our lives in small, subtle ways. It started with anonymous messages again. Nothing dramatic, just little whispers meant to unsettle us. He'll regret choosing you. Your marriage won't last. The truth always comes out. Childish, pathetic, but annoying. Then came a new wave of fake accounts watching our social media. Not messaging, just watching. Lurking. Monitoring. The digital version of someone peeking through your window at night. I started blocking them, one by one, but they kept coming back with new ones. They weren't attacking, they were observing. Waiting. Planning. That's what scared me, not their words, but their silence. Silence from someone who hates you is more dangerous than noise. Because noise means they're acting. Silence means they're thinking. And then came the incident that shattered whatever fragile calm we had built. One afternoon, while picking up my youngest from school, I saw his ex-wife's car parked across the street. She wasn't doing anything. She wasn't talking to anyone. She wasn't causing a scene. She was just sitting there, watching. Our eyes met through her windshield. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She just stared, expressionless. Cold. Calculating. It felt like being studied by something predatory. And even though she didn't approach us, the message was loud and clear: I'm still here. I didn't tell my husband right away. I didn't want to stress him. But when it happened a second time, and then a third, I realized this wasn't coincidence. She was watching our schedule, tracking our movements, learning our routine. It wasn't physical intimidation, it was psychological. A reminder that she wasn't finished. That she still had an eye on us. I finally told him, and for the first time in weeks, I saw real fear on his face. Not fear of her hurting him, but fear of her hurting us, emotionally, legally, mentally, any way she could. And just as we were trying to figure out how to handle that, his mother found a new way to reinsert herself into the narrative. She reached out to his extended family again, telling them he was living a lie, that I was controlling every aspect of his life, that he was isolated, that he was not allowed to speak to her. She twisted everything into a story where I was the villain and she was the abandoned, heartbroken mother. She leaned into her role like she was auditioning for a movie. And of course, some people bought it. Not all, but enough to cause tension. Suddenly, people we once trusted became distant. Invitations stopped. Conversations turned awkward. Some relatives avoided us entirely. I could feel their judgment like heat on my skin. They looked at me as if I had stolen him from them instead of simply building a life with him. They saw me not as his wife but as the wedge between him and his mother. They didn't know the truth, or maybe they didn't want to know because the truth wasn't dramatic enough for them. People love a scandal. They love a villain. And I made an easy one because I wasn't telling my side. I was too tired to defend myself. Too tired to keep explaining. Too tired to fight a story they had crafted so carefully. But something shifted inside me around that time. Something fundamental. I realized that I was done living in reaction to them. Done explaining myself to people who didn't deserve explanations. Done worrying about opinions that weren't rooted in truth. Done letting toxic people shape my emotions. I realized that I wasn't the weak one in this story. They were. People who constantly scheme are never strong, they're scared. Scared of being irrelevant. Scared of losing control. Scared of facing who they actually are without someone else to blame. And once I understood that, the fear they used to instill in me died. But even as I grew stronger internally, the situation outside continued to twist. One evening, a letter arrived at our door addressed to my husband. No return address. No name. No signature. Inside was a printed note that said, "You can still fix this. Your real family is waiting." I stared at it in disbelief. It wasn't handwritten, it was typed, like someone wanted to hide their handwriting. But the wording had his mother and his ex-wife all over it. They were trying again to manipulate him through guilt. Through nostalgia. Through psychological pressure. It was almost pathetic by this point, but still unsettling. My husband read it, sighed, and burned it in the sink. Watching the flames eat the paper was symbolic in a way that felt necessary. It was the moment he finally chose permanent closure. No more engagement. No more forgiveness. No more consideration. Just freedom. But freedom alone doesn't heal psychological wounds. And we still had so many. One night, when the kids were asleep, we sat on the couch in silence for a long time. He finally asked, "Do you ever think we'll fully escape them?" I didn't lie. I told him the truth, I don't think their obsession ends. But I think our reaction to it changes. And that was when I realized something important: they might never stop watching, never stop hating, never stop fantasizing about destroying us, but they would also never win. Because winning requires impact, and their impact was shrinking. Their influence was fading. Their power was slipping. They were ghosts, loud, annoying ghosts, but ghosts nonetheless. But before part 5 ends, there's one more thing that happened, something that changed the entire nature of the battle. Something that forced us to confront the truth about who they were and what they were capable of. One day, my daughter came home from school with a folded piece of paper in her backpack. When we opened it, my stomach dropped. It was a note, poorly disguised, telling her she should ask Daddy why he left his real family, telling her Mommy isn't letting Daddy be happy, telling her Grandma misses her. It was written in childish handwriting, fake handwriting, like someone tried to disguise the fact that an adult wrote it. Someone had slipped it into her backpack. Someone had been close enough to touch her things. And at that moment, everything changed. The battle wasn't emotional anymore. It wasn't social. It wasn't legal. It wasn't psychological. The moment I saw that note in my daughter's backpack, something inside me shifted in a way I can barely describe. Up until that point, everything they had done, every lie, every manipulation, every twisted attempt to break our home, had been horrible, yes, but still within the realm of emotional warfare. Painful. Traumatizing. Exhausting. But not physically dangerous. But that note, that piece of paper written in fake childish handwriting, that crossed into a new territory. That was someone approaching my child. Someone touching her things. Someone close enough to slip something into her belongings without being noticed. That wasn't emotional manipulation anymore. That was a threat. A physical encroachment into my child's safe space. A warning. A message. A declaration that they were willing to cross every line and violate every boundary. My hands shook as I held the note. Not from fear. From rage. A deep, primal rage that only a parent feels when their child is targeted. A rage so intense it felt cold rather than hot, like ice running through my veins. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I didn't shout. I just stared at that paper and felt something inside me harden into steel. My husband reacted differently. He went pale. Completely pale, like all the blood drained from his face. He kept reading the note over and over like he couldn't believe it was real. Like his brain refused to accept that someone would go this far. Then he looked at our daughter, who stood there watching us with big, worried eyes, and he knelt down and hugged her so tightly she squeaked. He whispered, "You're safe. I promise. You're safe." But I saw it, the fear behind his eyes. Not fear of them. Fear of what they were becoming. Fear of what they were capable of. Fear that he couldn't protect us from everything. And that fear, his fear, ignited something in me even stronger than anger. Because I realized that if I didn't stay strong, if I didn't take control, if I didn't protect my family at all costs, he would drown in guilt that didn't belong to him. We asked our daughter how the note got into her backpack. She shrugged and said she didn't know. That sometimes kids bump into each other or teachers' check bags or backpacks get piled together. There were a dozen innocent explanations, but none felt right. My instincts told me this wasn't random. Someone had waited for a moment when she wasn't looking. Someone who knew her. Someone who had access. Someone who was close enough to touch her things without raising suspicion. And the thought of that made me sick. I wanted to pull her out of school immediately. I wanted to homeschool her, lock every door, never let her out of my sight. But I knew I couldn't react out of fear. Fear gives them power. Fear feeds their obsession. Fear is exactly what they want. So instead, I went into strategic mode. We met with the school the next day. We didn't show anger, we showed concern. Serious, calm, parental concern. We explained what happened. We explained the ongoing situation. We explained that someone had been watching our family, someone tied to a messy past, someone unstable enough to cross boundaries that should never be crossed. The principal was shaken. She promised an investigation. She promised more supervision. She promised to review cameras, talk to staff, monitor anyone unusual. She even suggested adding extra safety measures during pickup and drop-off. And as grateful as I was for her efforts, I still felt uneasy. Because the kind of person who would slip a note into a child's backpack isn't easily deterred by school policies or polite warnings. They do what they want because they believe they're entitled to do it. That night, after the kids were asleep, my husband and I sat at the kitchen table in silence. The note lay between us like a poisonous thing. He kept rubbing his forehead like he was trying to erase the whole situation from his mind. I finally broke the silence and said, "This isn't about the house anymore. It's not even about you. They're targeting the kids now. They're trying to get in through." It became dangerous. Them. He nodded slowly, like he already knew but didn't want to say it out loud. Then he whispered, "I can't believe my mother is part of this." And that was when I realized something important. He had officially crossed the line between confusion and acceptance. He wasn't making excuses for her anymore. He wasn't trying to rationalize her behavior. He saw her clearly, maybe for the first time in his life. But the question remained, who actually put the note in the backpack? His ex-wife? His mother? Someone they sent? Someone they manipulated into helping them? We didn't have proof. But the handwriting, the wording, the emotional manipulation disguised as concern, it screamed of them. It carried their fingerprints even without signatures. And that knowledge lit a fire under me. A fire of protection. A fire of resolve. A fire of enough is enough. Over the next week, I changed everything. I adjusted our routines. I changed our pickup times. I switched entrances. I told teachers and staff exactly who was allowed near my children. I gave them photos of people who were banned from approaching them. I installed extra cameras around the house. I bought GPS tags for my kids' backpacks, not because I expected them to be taken, but because I needed peace of mind. And with each new safety measure, I felt my anxiety ease just a little bit. Not disappear, but become manageable. Like I finally had control again. But even with all those precautions, the psychological toll was still there. My daughter was confused. My youngest was anxious. My husband was quiet, distracted, introspective. And me? I felt like a warrior who had been fighting so long she forgot how to lower her shield. I realized I couldn't just protect my family physically, I needed to heal us emotionally. I started spending extra time with the kids. More hugs. More conversations. More reassurance. I told them we were safe. I told them Mommy and Daddy were strong. I told them nothing bad was going to happen because we were together. And slowly, their fear softened into trust again. But of course, healing doesn't mean weakness. Healing means clarity. Healing means boundaries. Healing means recognizing that some people aren't just toxic, they're obsessed. They're relentless. They don't stop because you want them to. They stop only when they burn out, when they lose access, or when they face consequences. And his ex-wife and his mother were far from burned out. I knew them well enough by then to understand one truth: they weren't the kind of women who accept defeat. They were the kind who simmer in resentment, plotting from the sidelines, waiting for an opening. And that opening came in the most unexpected way. My husband's extended family tried to mediate. Not because they cared about us. Not because they understood the truth. But because they didn't want to deal with drama anymore. They hosted a family event and invited us, except the invitation came with conditions. They said things like, "Maybe it's time to forgive, family is everything, holding grudges only hurts the children, you should talk things out." It was ridiculous. They wanted us to sit in the same room with the two people who traumatized our kids, threatened our home, stalked our routines, lied about us, and slipped a note to a child? Absolutely not. When we politely declined, they got offended. They acted like we were unreasonable. Like we were overreacting. Like we were the problem. And that was when I realized that some people aren't neutral, they're complicit. Whether they intend to be or not. But the turning point of part 5, the moment everything shifted into a new phase, happened one evening when my husband finally confronted the truth he had been avoiding. "They're not going to stop," he said, voice steady, almost eerie in its calm. "Not unless we make them." "What do you mean?" I asked, even though I already understood. "I mean boundaries aren't enough anymore. Distance isn't enough. We need something permanent. Something legal. Something that makes them face consequences if they ever try anything again." And that was the moment I knew. Part 6 wouldn't be just about survival anymore. It would be about justice. About accountability. About finally putting an end to the nightmare they created. The moment my husband said we needed something permanent, something legal, something that would actually hold weight in the real world and not just in our emotional space, something in me finally exhaled after months of silent suffocation. Because I knew he was right. We had tried boundaries. We had tried distance. We had tried blocking numbers, cutting ties, shutting doors, ignoring their noise, healing our wounds, rebuilding trust, finding peace, but peace can't survive when someone is still out there sharpening knives in the dark, waiting for the next chance to strike. And if they were bold enough to slip a note into our daughter's backpack, nothing, absolutely nothing, was off limits for them anymore. We weren't dealing with petty drama. We weren't dealing with jealous exes or overbearing mothers. We were dealing with people who had crossed into dangerous behavior. People who felt entitled to our lives. People who confused obsession with ownership. People who believed they were justified in stalking, watching, manipulating, lying, and now approaching our children. People without brakes, without boundaries, without shame. And people like that don't stop until someone stops them. So that night, while the house was quiet and the kids slept, we sat side by side at the kitchen table and opened our laptops. We weren't searching for advice anymore or how to handle toxic relatives. We were looking up attorneys. Not divorce attorneys, not restraining ourselves from the truth anymore. We were searching for lawyers who dealt with harassment, stalking, child endangerment, identity manipulation, false reporting, property claims, and family interruption. Every word we typed felt like a step toward freedom. My husband's hands shook a little when he typed, not from fear but from resolve. Like the weight of everything he'd been carrying was finally shifting into actionable energy. And as we scrolled through names, reviews, testimonials, legal pathways, evidence requirements, something inside me solidified. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was focused. We made appointments. Not one. Not two. Several. We weren't looking for the cheapest option, we were looking for the strongest. Someone who wouldn't be intimidated by manipulative women crying on command. Someone who understood what psychological harassment looks like. Someone who knew how to shut down obsessive behavior with legal consequences. And over the next few days, we met with them, one video call after another, explaining everything from the fake messages to the manipulated relatives to the child services incident to the stalking at school to the planted note. We didn't sugarcoat. We didn't dramatize. We laid out the truth as it happened, with dates, screenshots, statements, and details. And with every attorney we spoke to, the reaction was almost identical. This is not normal. This is not healthy. This is not just drama. This could escalate. You need protection. You need documentation. You need to file. And hearing professionals say those words, people who had seen real cases, real danger, real psychological warfare, validated everything I had been feeling but doubting. For months, I had second-guessed myself. Wondered if I was overreacting. Wondered if maybe I was too sensitive. Wondered if trauma had distorted my perception. But no. I wasn't imagining any of it. I had been surviving a coordinated attack from two unstable, resentful individuals who thrived on manipulation. And when the attorneys told us we had grounds, real grounds, for legal action, something inside me lifted. For the first time in a long time, I felt power rush back into my body. My voice. My identity. My motherhood. Everything they had tried to strip from me slowly returned like pieces of myself I didn't realize had been scattered. The attorneys had the same advice. Document everything. Every message. Every interaction. Every coincidence. Every sighting. Every rumor traced back to them. Every incident involving the kids. Every attempt to contact us. Every note, every email, every anonymous number. They told us to gather a timeline. They told us to save the screenshots, record dates, take photos of the note, gather statements from people who witnessed their behavior, keep records of every conversation with the school. They said that when harassment is psychological, the evidence has to build like a mountain. And we had enough to build a mountain range. Over the next week, our living room turned into a war room. Papers, files, folders, printed messages, photos, timestamps, documented stories, all of it spread across the table. I watched my husband as he sorted through the evidence, and I saw something shift in him that made me fall even deeper in love. The guilt that had once clouded his eyes was gone. The hesitation was gone. The fear of hurting his mother was gone. The doubts planted by his ex-wife were gone. He moved with purpose. Precision. Strength. He wasn't a man torn between two worlds anymore, he was a father and a husband protecting his own. His loyalty was no longer divided. It was focused, sharp like a blade. But toxic people don't sense when the tide is turning. They don't feel the shift. They don't recognize when their power is slipping. They just keep pushing, blindly, pathetically, because manipulation is the only tool they know. So while we were preparing our defense, they were preparing another attack, only this time they had no idea we were building a legal wall high enough to bury their efforts. It started with another anonymous message, this time accusing me of abusing my children. It wasn't sent to us, it was sent to one of my husband's cousins, the same cousin who had been supportive earlier. And instead of believing it, he screen captured it and sent it to us immediately. "They're still trying," he wrote. "You need to protect yourselves." And that was when I realized something important, people were finally seeing them for who they truly were. Their lies were becoming transparent. Their desperation was becoming obvious. Their stories were becoming inconsistent. And their credibility was crumbling. Then came the moment that nearly sent my husband over the edge. His mother left a voicemail on his work number because she was blocked everywhere else. Her voice was trembling, dramatic, dripping with fake emotion. She said she dreamed something terrible was going to happen to the children. She said she felt in her heart that they were unsafe. She said a real mother knows when something is wrong. It was pure manipulation. Weaponized intuition. Manufactured concern. A performance. But what pushed him past the breaking point was the end of the voicemail, where she whispered, "You will regret choosing her. One day you'll realize you lost everything." That one line snapped something inside him. Something fragile but fundamental. He took his phone, played the message for me, and then deleted her contact from every possible device. It was symbolic. A burial. A final severing of the cord she had wrapped around his throat for decades. But just when we thought we had seen the worst of their desperation, his ex-wife launched one final stunt, public humiliation. She made a long post online claiming she had been silenced, that she was fighting for her rights, that she had been wronged by two people who stole her family. She wrote paragraphs painting herself as a victim of emotional abuse from us both. She called herself a survivor. She said she wouldn't stop until justice was served. She even wrote, "I won't stay quiet while someone else raises my family in my place." It was delusional. Completely unhinged. But people ate it up like candy because drama attracts the weak-minded like moths to flame. But something interesting happened this time. People started pushing back. Commenters asked for screenshots, evidence, details, receipts, proof. And she had none. All she had were tears and stories and dramatic quotes about betrayal. And slowly, the sympathy she once relied on evaporated. Her credibility cracked. Her narrative no longer held weight. And for the first time, she realized people were questioning her instead of us. And when manipulators lose their audience, they lose their oxygen. Around this time, my husband and I filed the paperwork, restraining orders, harassment claims, school protections, official documentation of everything we had endured. The burden we had been carrying emotionally was now shifting onto the legal system where it belonged. And with each form we submitted, I felt lighter. Not because the danger was gone, but because we weren't fighting alone anymore. But even as we moved forward, the emotional aftermath was heavy. I found myself becoming hyper-aware of everything, every noise outside at night, every unfamiliar car on our street, every person who looked our way at the grocery store. Trauma rewires you. It sharpens your instincts. It heightens your senses. It makes you cautious in ways you never were before. But it also makes you strong. Strong enough to stand between danger and your family without hesitation. And through it all, our marriage changed, deepened, strengthened. We didn't just survive the storm, we learned how to build shelter together in the middle of it. We talked more, loved harder, protected each other fiercely. There was no room for doubt anymore. No cracks for their poison to seep into. No hesitation in our loyalty. We were solid, finally solid. But part 6 ends with the moment we realized the battle wasn't just about us anymore. It had grown bigger, beyond drama, beyond manipulation, beyond obsession. It had become a case. A file. A documented pattern of psychological harassment. And the system was now involved. That meant consequences. Real ones. The women who had spent months trying to tear us apart had no idea that the ground beneath them was starting to crumble. They had no idea we were no longer vulnerable. They had no idea we were protected. They had no idea we were prepared for war. I always believed that karma works on its own timing, that consequences don't need our permission to arrive. But I never realized how quietly justice can build itself in the background, collecting pieces the same way we had been collecting evidence, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Part 7 wasn't loud. It wasn't explosive. There wasn't one dramatic event where everything suddenly snapped into place. No, this was the slow, inevitable tightening of a noose woven entirely by their own hands. And watching it happen, day by day, felt like witnessing a puzzle finally solving itself, one painful piece at a time. By the time we officially filed our harassment documentation, something subtle had shifted in the air, like we had moved from defense to offense without even realizing it. The moment those papers went through, the game changed. It wasn't personal anymore. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't about who said what or who believed who. It became legal. It became documented. It became factual. And something about that terrified them more than anything we'd done so far. In the first few days after they were served notice, everything went silent. Completely silent. No messages. No shadow accounts watching our social media. No strange cars near the school. No gossip floating around through relatives. No posts from the ex-wife. No dramatic voicemails from his mother. Nothing. It was eerie, like the quiet after a storm that feels too calm to be natural. At first, I didn't trust it. Silence from them never meant peace. It meant plotting. It meant regrouping. It meant their brains were spinning in circles, trying to find a loophole, a new angle, a new way to twist the situation in their favor. But the silence wasn't strategy this time. It was panic. The first sign of that panic came in the form of a 3-page message the ex-wife sent to one of my husband's cousins, begging him to intervene, telling him she was frightened, misunderstood, unjustly accused. She claimed she never meant harm, that she was only trying to protect her rights, that she was worried for the children's well-being. She cried in the message, literally typed sob like she was acting out a tragedy in her mind. And the cousin, bless him, forwarded the entire message straight to us with the words, "She's spiraling." Then came the moment we knew the legal pressure was breaking her. She posted a long, rambling message online talking about being targeted, feeling unsafe, having her words twisted, and needing support during this difficult time. But gone was the confidence she once displayed. Gone was the righteous anger. Gone was the smugness. Her words were frantic, scattered, inconsistent. People noticed. Comments were no longer supportive. Some asked if she needed help. Others asked why she was constantly involved in our life. Someone even wrote, "If you're innocent, why are you so worried about legal action?" And that comment alone was enough to send her into meltdown mode. She deleted the post within an hour. His mother, though, her reaction was different. While the ex-wife crumbled emotionally, his mother tried to play the role she had perfected over years, the victim. She called distant relatives crying, claiming she had no idea why we attacked her. She played innocent. She said she was shocked, confused, heartbroken. She said she barely spoke to us, a lie, that she supported us as much as she could, another lie, and that she was being punished for loving her family. She was skilled, almost professional, at this manipulation. Every tear was calculated. Every word rehearsed. Every sigh dramatic. But what she didn't realize was that people had receipts now. People had watched her behavior. People had heard her stories change over time. People had seen the ex-wife tag her in toxic posts. People had noticed her involvement. And most importantly, people were tired. Tired of the drama. Tired of her theatrics. Tired of being dragged into her emotional whirlpool. So instead of rallying behind her like she expected, most relatives simply nodded politely and stepped back. A few even told her they didn't want to get involved. And nothing infuriates a manipulative person more than being denied an audience. But the biggest shift, the moment when I knew things were finally turning in our favor, came when the school contacted us again. They had concluded their internal investigation. They reviewed cameras, checked classroom logs, interviewed staff. They couldn't determine exactly who put the note in the backpack, but they did confirm something else. A woman matching the ex-wife's description had been seen near the school multiple times during pickup hours on days she had no reason to be there. She wasn't speaking to staff. She wasn't picking up a child. She was just present. Watching. And that alone was enough to trigger the school to add her to a restricted individual list, meaning she wasn't allowed near the children unless she had official business or permission, which she never would. When my husband heard that, something in him loosened. Relief, anger, sadness, everything mixed together. I could see it in the way he ran his hand through his hair and exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. The school had done what we couldn't, put an official boundary between her and our children. But consequences rarely come in one direction. They ripple. And the next ripple hit the ex-wife directly when the police contacted her for a statement. Not an arrest. Not a charge. A statement. But to someone who had been operating in the shadows, weaponizing lies and manipulation while pretending to be the victim online, that was enough to shake her to her core. She went silent again. Completely silent. Her social media dried up. Her messages stopped. Her dramatic posts disappeared. It was like she vanished into thin air. And while silence used to scare me, this silence felt different. It felt like fear, not mine, hers. The kind of fear that comes when someone finally realizes the system is watching. Then, slowly, another set of consequences crept in, consequences for his mother. People she had confided in, manipulated, or emotionally drained started pulling away. They stopped answering her calls. They stopped visiting. They stopped indulging her stories. I think the relatives she expected to rally around her realized something critical. Aligning with her meant getting pulled into something messy, potentially illegal, and definitely toxic. And toxic people are only charming until they become inconvenient. Once that happens, the walls close in fast. But even though justice was finally moving in our direction, I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. Because the emotional debris of everything we had been through still covered every corner of our life. The kids were calmer, yes, but still occasionally asked questions that cut me deep. My oldest worried about safety in a way no child should have to. My youngest clung to me at bedtime. And I, despite the progress, still checked locks twice a night out of habit. One evening, I caught myself staring at the front door longer than necessary, listening for sounds that weren't there. My husband placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "It's over." And for the first time, I actually believed him. Not because I trusted them to stop, they never would. But because I trusted the boundaries, the protection, the consequences finally being aligned with the truth. But Part 7 wasn't just about external consequences. It was also the beginning of internal healing for us, especially my husband. For months he had lived in denial about who his mother truly was. He had excuses, rationalizations, emotional blind spots. But once the legal situation began to take shape, once he saw how far she had gone, once the school confirmed her involvement indirectly, once relatives started distancing themselves from her, he had no emotional crutch left. He finally faced the truth head-on. His mother was not the woman he believed she was. She never had been. And the grief of that realization was heartbreaking. One night, he sat on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands, and I sat beside him quietly. He whispered, "I feel like I'm losing a parent." I told him gently, "You're not losing someone who loved you. You're losing the illusion that she did." Those words broke him a little, but they also freed him. Because illusions can become prisons, and he had been locked in hers his whole life. I always thought the end of a battle would feel loud, like triumph, like fireworks, like some dramatic movie scene where the villain is dragged away screaming and the hero stands victorious in slow motion. But real endings aren't loud. They're quiet. Soft. Almost anticlimactic in the strangest way. Because the truth is, the real victory isn't the moment your enemies fall, it's the moment you finally stop looking over your shoulder. And that moment didn't arrive all at once for me. It came slowly, building like dawn creeping into a dark room little by little until suddenly, without realizing it, the light had filled everything. That's what the final stretch of our story feels like, not a bang, but a sunrise. When we got that letter from the attorney saying it was time for the final step, a calm washed over me that I hadn't felt in months. Not excitement. Not relief. Just calm. The kind of calm that comes from knowing you've done everything you can. The kind of calm that comes from trusting that the truth finally has its own momentum. The kind of calm that whispers, "You're safe now." For the first time since everything started, I actually believed it. The final step wasn't dramatic. It wasn't about confrontation or shouting or revenge. It was simply documentation, strong enough, thorough enough, undeniable enough to make sure that if those two women ever tried anything again, the consequences would be immediate and severe. The attorney called it a protective package, a combination of restraining orders, incident reports, school safety filings, property documentation, digital harassment logs, witness statements, and psychological evaluations detailing the impact their behavior had on our children. A fortress made of paper. A shield made of truth. But even though we were preparing legally, something else was happening emotionally, a process I didn't expect. I thought that once I knew justice was on our side, I'd feel triumphant. Vindicated. Maybe even vengeful. But what surprised me was that I didn't feel any of that. What I felt was tired. Deeply, profoundly tired. Not defeated, just done. Done with the battle. Done with the fear. Done with the anger. Done with carrying their poison inside me like some toxic residue. I wanted peace more than revenge. I wanted silence more than victory. I wanted to move forward, not look back. But while I was feeling this calm, something else was happening on their side, something I never expected. They were falling apart. Not because of us, but because the lies they built their world on were collapsing under their own weight. The mother, my husband's mother, lost her audience. People she had manipulated for years finally realized they had been used. They started pulling away quietly. She stopped getting invited places. She stopped receiving sympathy in conversations. She stopped being the center of family gatherings. And when manipulators lose attention, they lose themselves. It's like watching someone deflate from the inside. Her calls, when they tried to reach distant relatives, became more frantic. Her explanations became inconsistent. Her stories contradicted themselves. She wasn't just losing influence, she was losing grip. The ex-wife, on the other hand, went in the opposite direction. She didn't collapse quietly, she combusted loudly. She ranted online. She deleted posts. She posted again. She blocked people. She unblocked them. She wrote long chaotic paragraphs about being misunderstood, fighting for justice, victimhood, gaslighting, family, abuse, my truth, my story, my rights, as if saying those words enough times would magically make her the hero of a narrative she had twisted. But the more she spoke, the more people saw the cracks. The more inconsistencies surfaced. The more the sympathy she once manipulated turned into skepticism, then annoyance, then disgust. She wasn't a victim, she was the architect of her own destruction. But even as they unraveled, we kept moving forward. The attorney filed the final stack of documents. The school added extra protections to keep the kids safe from any outside interference. My husband met with his HR team to explain the situation in case his mother or ex-wife tried reaching him at work again. We even installed final security measures around the house, nothing extreme, just enough to feel secure. And with every step, I felt a layer of fear fall away. But the strangest part, the part that surprised me most, was the emotional peace that came after we did everything legally possible. It was like my brain finally accepted that I didn't have to fight anymore. I didn't have to stay alert 24/7. I didn't have to brace myself for the next attack. My body started to relax in small ways, my shoulders lowered, my stomach unclenched, my sleep deepened. The hypervigilance that had become my second nature slowly faded, like a fog lifting from my mind. My children changed too. They became more playful again. More carefree. My oldest stopped asking anxious questions. My younger one slept in her own bed without tears. They laughed louder. They fought less. They started drawing pictures of our family again, pictures without fear hidden in the corners. And seeing them return to themselves, was the greatest healing of all. My husband, he healed in his own way. The grief of losing the mother he thought he had didn't disappear overnight, but it softened. He stopped blaming himself. He stopped wondering what he could have done differently. He stopped replaying the past in loops. He started talking about the future again, our future. Our home. Our kids' plans. Trips he wanted to take. Projects he wanted to start. He began rebuilding not just his life, but his identity. Not the identity shaped by guilt and obligation to a toxic parent, but the identity of a free man. And me. I found a version of myself I didn't know existed. Stronger. Quieter. More grounded. Less reactive. More intuitive. A woman who survived betrayal, manipulation, harassment, stalking, emotional warfare, and still stood tall. I didn't become harder from all this. I became clearer. Sharp in the ways that mattered. Soft in the ways that felt safe. Protective without being paranoid. Confident without needing validation. Loving without being naive. But of course, like all final chapters, there was a moment of closure, not dramatic, not confrontational, but symbolic. It happened on a sunny afternoon when a letter arrived from the attorney saying everything was finalized. Everything documented. Everything approved. Everything filed. Everything sealed. Everything enforceable. The next steps were simple: live our life. And that letter, with its plain black text and official stamps, felt like a door clicking shut behind us. A door leading away from chaos. Away from fear. Away from manipulation. Away from them. But the true emotional closure came a few days later in the most unexpected way. I was in the backyard watching the kids play when I heard the front door open. My husband walked out holding a small box. He sat next to me, opened it, and inside were dozens of papers, old messages, screenshots, notes, printed posts, timelines, receipts, everything we had collected. Evidence of the nightmare we had lived. "I don't want these in our home anymore," he said softly. And without another word, we lit the fire pit. We didn't throw the papers in angrily. We didn't cry. We didn't celebrate. We simply placed them into the flame, one by one, watching the past burn away until nothing but ash remained. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about victory. It was about release. And as the last piece curled into smoke, I felt something inside me shift permanently. We were free. Truly free. Free in a way that didn't feel fragile. Free in a way that didn't feel temporary. Free in a way that felt earned. And now, looking back, the wildest part of this entire journey isn't the drama. Or the lies. Or the manipulation. Or the moments of fear. It's the realization that what was meant to destroy us actually revealed who we truly are. Stronger. Closer. Unbreakable. They tried to take our home, but they only